The words hung in the air like shattered glass, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. I'm leaving you, Emma. I'm in love with someone else. Marcus stood in our living room, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his tie the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he delivered the news that would demolish our 7-year marriage. My hands trembled as I set down the coffee mug I'd been holding, watching the dark liquid ripple from the impact. Outside, rain pelted against the windows of our modest suburban home, the home I'd saved for years to help purchase, the home where we'd planned to raise children someday. That dream now lay in ruins at my feet. Who is she? I managed to whisper, though part of me already knew. There had been signs over the past 6 months, late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls he'd taken the other room, the way he'd started dressing better, wearing cologne I didn't recognize. Marcus had changed, become someone I barely recognized, trading our quiet dinners for networking events and our weekend hikes for golf outings with clients. It's Victoria, he said, finally looking at me with something that almost resembled guilt. Victoria Sterling, my boss. The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party, a striking woman in her early 40s with sharp features, sharper ambitions, and a smile that never quite reached her ice blue eyes. She barely acknowledged my existence that night, looking through me as if I were just another piece of office furniture. She understands my ambition, Emma. She sees my potential. With her, I can be someone. His words twisted the knife deeper. What was I, then? Just the woman who'd supported him through business school, who'd worked 2 jobs so he could pursue unpaid internships, who'd believed in him when no one else did. We're getting married, he continued, his voice taking on an edge of defensive anger. She's divorcing her husband, and we're going to build something together. Something real. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain scorching through my chest. But instead, I stood there in frozen silence, watching the man I'd loved transform into a stranger. He'd already packed his bags. They sat by the door like tombstones marking the death of our marriage. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. He was already mentally gone, already living in his new life with his powerful boss and her promises of corporate advancement. He grabbed his luggage and walked toward the door, pausing only briefly to leave his wedding ring on the hallway table. The small gold band rolled in a circle before settling, and somehow that tiny movement broke something inside me. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone. Alone with the wreckage of my marriage, with the humiliation of being left for another woman, with the crushing weight of rejection. I sank to the floor, finally letting the tears come, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. But beneath the grief and betrayal, something else was stirring, something Marcus had never known about me, a secret that would change everything. The morning after Marcus left, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by untouched breakfast and unopened sympathy texts from friends who'd heard the news through the gossip mill. Sunlight streamed through the windows, cruelly cheerful, illuminating the empty chair where my husband used to sit. I stared at my phone, my finger hovering over a contact I'd rarely called in recent years, my father's attorney, Richard Chin. There was something Marcus didn't know, something I'd kept private not out of secrecy, but because it had never seemed relevant to our life together. My maiden name was Emma Thornton, and while Marcus knew my father had died when I was 25, he'd never asked many questions about my family or my inheritance. He'd assumed, like everyone else, that I was just an ordinary middle-class woman working as a nonprofit program coordinator. The truth was far more complicated. My father, James Thornton, had been a brilliant entrepreneur who'd built Thornton Industries from the ground up, transforming it from a small manufacturing company into a diversified corporate empire worth billions. But after my mother's death from cancer when I was in college, he'd become paranoid about gold diggers and opportunists. He'd created an elaborate trust structure, placing his assets under neutral-sounding corporate names and management companies. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, he left everything to me, his only child, but with specific instructions. The inheritance was to be managed by a board of trustees until I turned 35, at which point I would gain full control. Until then, I received a modest monthly stipend that covered my basic needs, but didn't broadcast my wealth. My father had wanted me to live a normal life, to find love for the right reasons, to build my own identity separate from money and corporate power. I'd honored his wishes, living simply, working a job I loved, and never mentioning the fortune waiting for me. When I met Marcus in graduate school, he'd been drawn to my kindness and intelligence, not a bank account he didn't know existed. Or so I'd thought. Now, looking back with the bitter clarity that betrayal brings, I wondered if he'd left me precisely because he thought I had nothing to offer, no social status, no corporate connections, no path to the success he suddenly craved. The irony was devastating. Marcus had abandoned me for his boss, for Victoria Sterling and her position of power at Sterling Enterprises, completely unaware that in just 3 months, when I turned 35, I would become one of the wealthiest women in the country. More than that, he didn't know the full extent of my inheritance's reach. I pulled out a folder I kept locked in my home office safe, documents I reviewed annually but rarely thought about otherwise. My hands shook as I read through the list of holdings, the corporate entities, the subsidiary companies. And there, on page 17, my breath caught in my throat. Thornton Industries had made a strategic acquisition 5 years ago, purchasing a controlling interest in a struggling tech company and restructuring it under new management. That company had been renamed, rebranded, and turned around so successfully that it was now considered one of the fastest-growing firms in the sector. Its current name? Sterling Enterprises. Victoria Sterling's company, where Marcus worked, where he'd climbed the corporate ladder, where he'd fallen into his boss's bed, all of it ultimately belonged to me. The final layer of irony nearly made me laugh. In 3 months, I wouldn't just be wealthy. I would be Victoria Sterling's boss. I would own the company where Marcus had sold his soul for advancement. The universe had handed me the ultimate revenge, wrapped in layers of corporate structure and trust documents. The question was, what would I do with it? I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange fugue state, going through the motions of my normal life while my mind raced with possibilities. At work, I smiled at colleagues and coordinated our nonprofit's community programs, but every spare moment was spent researching, planning, and consulting with Richard Chun. "You're sure about the timeline?" I asked during our 3rd phone call that week. I gained full control on my 35th birthday, no exceptions. Richard's warm voice carried a note of concern. "Yes, Emma. September 23rd, as stipulated in your father's will. But I have to ask, why this sudden interest? You've never seemed particularly concerned with the business side of your inheritance before. This isn't about your separation, is it?" I paused, staring out my office window at the city skyline. Let's just say I'm starting to see things from a different perspective. I'd like a full audit of Sterling Enterprises. Financial health, management structure, employee satisfaction, everything. The investigation Richard launched was discreet, but thorough. Within a week, I had a comprehensive picture of the company my soon-to-be ex-husband worked for, and it wasn't pretty beneath the glossy surface. Sterling Enterprises had indeed grown rapidly under Victoria Sterling's leadership, but the methods were questionable at best. She'd slashed employee benefits, outsourced entire departments, and cultivated a toxic work culture that prioritized profits over people. The turnover rate was astronomical. Several former employees had filed complaints about hostile work environment, though most had been settled with non-disclosure agreements. Victoria herself was known as a ruthless operator who chewed through assistance, took credit for others' ideas, and maintained her position through intimidation and strategic alliances with the board members. The board that, in 3 months, I would have the power to replace. More interesting was Marcus's position in all of this. According to the internal documents Richard obtained through his legal channels, my husband had been promoted 3 times in the past 6 months, an unprecedented rise that had caused resentment among longer-tenured employees. Each promotion coincided with Victoria's divorce proceedings becoming more contentious. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. Marcus wasn't just having an affair with his boss, he was her strategy for maintaining control. By marrying a loyal subordinate she'd groomed and promoted, Victoria would ensure she had at least one absolutely trustworthy person in the executive ranks. It was calculated, cold, and exactly the kind of move I was learning to expect from her. Marcus, the man I'd loved, had become a pawn in a corporate power play. Whether he realized it or not, he'd traded one life for another, and the life he'd chosen was built on sand. I made careful notes, building a comprehensive picture not just of the company, but of Victoria's vulnerabilities. She'd made enemies, lots of them. Investors who felt she was too aggressive, board members who questioned her judgment, employees who'd left with stories to tell. If I wanted to, I could make her professional life very difficult come September. But I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. Instead, I hired a private investigator named Sarah Martinez, a former corporate fraud specialist who came highly recommended. I want to know everything about Victoria Sterling's personal and professional life, I told her during our first meeting at a quiet downtown cafe. Every skeleton in her closet, every questionable business decision, every person she's wronged who might be willing to talk. Sarah studied me with sharp eyes. This is about more than business, isn't it? I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my face after weeks of grief. Let's just say I'm conducting due diligence on an investment I'm about to acquire. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with. What I didn't say was that I was preparing for war. 6 weeks after Marcus left, I received an unexpected visit from my mother-in-law, Patricia. We'd always had a cordial relationship, though she'd made no secret of thinking her son could have done better than a nonprofit worker with no apparent family wealth. She stood at my door on a rainy Saturday afternoon, looking uncomfortable and older than her 60 years. "May I come in, Emma? I think we need to talk." I let her in, offering tea I didn't really want to make while she settled nervously on my couch. "I owe you an apology," she began, and the words surprised me so much I nearly dropped the kettle. "I've been unfair to you over the years. I thought Marcus needed someone more ambitious, someone who moved in the right circles. I encouraged him to network, to prioritize his career. I never thought—" She trailed off, twisting her wedding ring. "I never thought it would lead to this." "Did you know about Victoria?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Patricia shook her head vehemently. "Not until he announced it. Emma, I was horrified. That woman is using him. Anyone can see it. She's twice divorced, ruthlessly ambitious, and from what I've heard through my own social circles, she's notorious for treating people as disposable assets." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Marcus won't listen to me. He thinks he's in love, that this is his chance at the life he deserves. He's talking about her connections, her wealth, the opportunities she's opening for him. He's become someone I don't recognize." I felt an unexpected sympathy for this woman who'd never particularly liked me but was watching her son self-destruct. "What do you want me to do about it, Patricia?" He made his choice. She looked at me with something like desperation. "I want you to fight for your marriage. I know I have no right to ask, but Marcus is making a terrible mistake. Victoria Sterling is not a good person." The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it. Patricia wanted me to save Marcus from the woman who would be my employee in 6 weeks, the company that would be mine to control, the future that looked so golden from his perspective, but was actually a trap of his own making. "I appreciate you coming here," I said carefully, "but Marcus is an adult. He's made his decisions, and he'll have to live with the consequences." Patricia studied me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a new respect, perhaps, or a recognition that I was stronger than she'd ever given me credit for. "You're different," she observed. "Harder somehow. I don't blame you. What he did was unforgivable." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Emma, I think my son was a fool to let you go. And I suspect he's going to realize that when it's far too late." After she left, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, turning her words over in my mind. The old Emma would have considered fighting for her marriage, would have tried to win Marcus back, would have blamed herself for not being enough. But that Emma was gone, burned away by betrayal and replaced by someone who understood that some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. I pulled out my phone and checked the calendar app I'd been obsessively monitoring. 43 days until my 35th birthday. 43 days until everything changed. I'd been patient, gathering information, building my case, preparing my strategy. But Patricia's visit had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about revenge or corporate restructuring. This was about justice. For me, for the employees Victoria had mistreated, for everyone who'd ever been used as a stepping stone by people like her. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Richard Chen. It was time to accelerate the timeline, to prepare for my formal assumption of control. And it was time to start assembling a new board of directors, people I could trust to help me rebuild Sterling Enterprises into something better. Something my father would have been proud of. Marcus and Victoria thought they were building a future together. They had no idea I was about to become their reckoning. The next month passed in a blur of clandestine meetings and careful preparation. I took a leave of absence from my nonprofit job, citing the divorce as needing time to process, which wasn't entirely untrue. But instead of wallowing in self-pity as everyone expected, I was attending accelerated business management courses online, meeting with corporate consultants Richard recommended, and learning everything I could about running a major enterprise. My father had built Thornton Industries with vision and integrity, and I was determined to honor that legacy by doing the same with Sterling Enterprises once it was officially mine. The private investigator, Sarah Martinez, delivered her findings 3 weeks before my birthday, and they were even more damning than I'd hoped. Victoria Sterling's rise to CEO had been paved with questionable dealings, insider trading allegations that had been quietly settled, harassment complaints swept under rugs of non-disclosure agreements, and a pattern of financial manipulation that bordered on fraud. "She's vulnerable," Sarah explained during our meeting at her downtown office. "Very vulnerable. If you wanted to remove her immediately, you'd have grounds. But here's what's interesting. She doesn't know she's vulnerable. She thinks she's untouchable." Sarah pushed a thick folder across the desk. "This is everything on Marcus, too. You should know what you're dealing with." I hesitated before opening it. Part of me didn't want to know, wanted to preserve some memory of the man I'd loved. But I'd learned that sentimentality was a luxury I couldn't afford. Inside were photographs of Marcus and Victoria at expensive restaurants, romantic getaways to Napa Valley and the Hamptons, all while our divorce was being finalized. But more interesting were the internal company emails Sarah had obtained through a source still working at Sterling Enterprises. They showed Marcus actively helping Victoria identify employees she saw as threats, providing information about potential whistleblowers, essentially serving as her spy and enforcer. My husband hadn't just been seduced by power, he'd become a willing instrument of it. Any remaining sympathy I'd felt evaporated like morning dew. I spent the next 2 weeks assembling my team. Richard Chen would serve as general counsel, a position he accepted enthusiastically. "Your father would be so proud," he told me. "Not just of what you're about to do, but of why you're doing it." I recruited 3 new board members, a former Fortune 500 CEO known for ethical leadership, a labor rights advocate who'd built her career protecting workers, and a tech innovator whose company had been destroyed by Victoria's hostile takeover tactics years ago. Each of them had their own reasons for wanting to see Sterling Enterprises transformed, and each brought expertise I would need. We met secretly in conference rooms rented under assumed names, planning our strategy like generals preparing for battle. The goal wasn't just to remove Victoria, it was to rebuild the entire corporate culture, to prove that a company could be both profitable and principled. My 35th birthday fell on a Monday, and I woke before dawn with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Today, everything would change. Today, I would stop being Emma Thornton, abandoned wife and nonprofit worker, and become Emma Thornton, majority shareholder and soon-to-be chairwoman of Sterling Enterprises. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this occasion, armor for the corporate battlefield I was about to enter. My hands were steady as I applied minimal makeup and pulled my dark hair into a professional bun. The woman in the mirror looked confident, capable, nothing like the heartbroken mess I'd been 2 months ago. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the offices of Chen and Associates, where Richard and my newly formed board of directors were waiting. "Happy birthday, Emma," Richard said with a smile that was both warm and fierce. ready to claim your inheritance. I thought about my father, about the empire he'd built and the values he'd instilled in me. I thought about Marcus and Victoria, celebrating what they believed was their triumph, completely unaware of the storm about to break over their heads. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's get to work." The Sterling Enterprises headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in the financial district, all glass and steel ambition reaching toward the sky. I'd been here once before, for that Christmas party where Victoria had looked through me like I was invisible. Today, I walked through the same revolving doors with my legal team flanking me, and everything was different. The receptionist's polite smile faltered when Richard Chin presented our credentials and demanded an immediate meeting with the board of directors. "I'm sorry, but you can't just walk in without an appointment," she protested, already reaching for her phone to call security. Richard placed a formal letter on her desk. "This is notification of a majority shareholder exercising her right to call an emergency board meeting under the company bylaws. I suggest you inform the directors immediately. We'll wait in the executive conference room." Her face went pale as she scanned the document. Within minutes, security guards appeared, but not to escort us out, to escort us up. The executive floor was decorated in Victoria's signature style: cold, modern, expensive. Black and white photography lined the walls, abstract pieces that probably cost more than most employees' annual salaries. As we passed offices and cubicles, I caught glimpses of Marcus's workspace: corner office, stunning view, nameplate that read Marcus Cole, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. A title he'd obtained by sleeping with the boss and betraying everything decent about himself. I didn't let myself feel anything about that. Not yet. The conference room was already filling with confused board members when we entered. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her ice blue eyes blazing with fury barely contained beneath a professional exterior. She'd aged well, I noticed. Expensive procedures and treatments, keeping her looking younger than her 43 years. She wore a blood-red power suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Who are you people, and why are you interrupting our morning operations?" Richard Chin stepped forward, his expression pleasant, but his voice carrying an edge of steel. "Miss Sterling, allow me to introduce Emma Thornton, majority shareholder of Thornton Industries and its subsidiaries, which, as I'm sure you're aware, includes this company." I watched the color drain from Victoria's face as comprehension dawned. Her eyes snapped to me, really seeing me for the first time, and I saw the moment she made the connection. "You're Marcus's wife," she whispered. "Ex-wife, technically," I corrected, my voice steady and cold. "The divorce was finalized last week. But yes, I'm the woman you probably don't remember meeting at the Christmas party 2 years ago. The woman whose husband you seduced away with promises of power and advancement. The woman you thought was nobody." I stepped closer, letting her see the steel in my eyes. "Surprise. I'm your boss." The room erupted in chaos. Board members who'd been in Victoria's pocket began frantically checking their phones and laptops, confirming what we'd just told them. Others who'd suspected Thornton Industries might eventually exercise more control wore expressions of grim satisfaction. Victoria recovered quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place. "I see. Well, Miss Thornton, while this is certainly unexpected, I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. I've grown this company's value by 300% since you took over after the Thornton Industries acquisition," I interrupted. "Yes, I'm aware. I'm also aware of how you achieved that growth. The slashed benefits, the hostile work environment, the questionable accounting practices. Should I continue?" I nodded to Richard, who began distributing folders to each board member. "Inside you'll find documentation of numerous irregularities in Ms. Sterling's management, along with a proposal for immediate restructuring." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this. I have a contract, which includes a morality clause and provisions for termination if the majority shareholder determines that leadership is not acting in the company's best interests," Richard interjected smoothly. "We'll, of course, provide the full severance package outlined in your agreement. But effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties as CEO." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone from pale to red, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're doing this because of Marcus," she spat. "This is revenge, pure and simple. You're abusing your power because you're a jealous, bitter. I'm doing this because you're a terrible leader who's built success on the backs of exploited employees and questionable ethics." I cut her off, my voice sharp as broken glass. "Marcus is irrelevant to this decision. Though speaking of my ex-husband, I assume he's somewhere in the building? Security, please have Marcus Cole brought to the conference room immediately." Victoria's eyes widened as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about her. It was about the entire corrupt system she'd built, including the man she'd stolen and transformed into her accomplice. "You wouldn't dare," she breathed. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Watch me." Marcus walked into the conference room 5 minutes later, his confident stride faltering when he saw the assembled crowd. His eyes found Victoria first, taking in her rigid posture and furious expression, then swept the room until they landed on me. I watched the progression of emotions cross his face: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. "Emma?" His voice came out strangled. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Marcus," I said pleasantly, as if we'd run into each other at the grocery store rather than in the middle of me dismantling his new life. "I'm surprised you remember my name. It's been, 2 months since you walked out of our marriage." He looked between Victoria and me, his mind clearly racing to make sense of the situation. He'd loosened his ties slightly, and I noticed he was wearing cufflinks I didn't recognize, probably a gift from Victoria. Everything about him screamed success and ambition, from his expensive haircut to his Italian leather shoes. This was the life he'd wanted, the man he'd become. I barely recognized him. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally. "Why are you here? What's going on?" Richardson spoke up, his voice professionally courteous. "Mr. Cole, your ex-wife is the majority shareholder of this company through Thornton Industries. She's just assumed active control and is conducting a restructuring of senior leadership." I watched my ex-husband process this information. His face went through another series of contortions, confusion giving way to shock, shock to disbelief, and disbelief to something that looked almost like physical pain. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Emma works for a nonprofit. She drives a 10-year-old Honda. He trailed off, and I could see the moment everything clicked into place. Every time he complained about my lack of ambition, every dismissive comment about my modest lifestyle, every comparison to Victoria's wealth and power, all of it recontextualized in an instant. "Oh God," he breathed. "Surprise," I said, echoing my earlier greeting to Victoria. "Turns out the wife you left because she wasn't ambitious enough, the woman who wasn't someone in your eyes, is actually one of the wealthiest women in the country. And the company you sold your soul to join, the boss you betrayed me for, they're mine." Marcus collapsed into the nearest chair, his face ashen. Victoria moved toward him instinctively, her hand reaching for his shoulder, but he flinched away from her touch. That small movement seemed to break something in her. "This is insane," Victoria said, her voice rising. "You can't just walk in here and destroy everything I've built because your marriage failed. Marcus and I are in love. We're getting married. You're just a bitter ex-wife using money to what?" I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. "To hold people accountable? To demand ethical business practices? To stop a toxic leader from destroying more lives?" I turned to address the board members, most of whom were watching this drama unfold with undisguised fascination. "Ms. Sterling has run this company like her personal kingdom, promoting loyalists regardless of qualification, crushing anyone who questioned her methods, and prioritizing short-term profits over sustainable growth and employee welfare. The documentation in front of you proves all of this and more." I pulled out my phone and projected onto the conference room screen a series of emails and internal documents Sarah Martinez had obtained. They showed Victoria and Marcus working together to identify and remove employees who might challenge her authority, including one whistleblower who'd been fired on trumped-up charges. "This is the leadership you've been living under," I continued. "This is what passes for corporate culture at Sterling Enterprises. And it ends. Today. Marcus stared at the screen, his face reflecting the growing realization of exactly what he'd become. Emma, I mean, Victoria said it was necessary for the companies. Don't, I said sharply, cutting him off. Don't make excuses. You knew what you were doing. You chose this. The room fell silent except for the hum of the projector. Victoria looked cornered, dangerous. Marcus looked destroyed. And I felt empty. I'd imagined this moment would feel triumphant, victorious, sweet with revenge. Instead, I just felt tired and sad about what we'd all become. The board will vote on Ms. Sterling's termination and my proposed leadership restructuring, Richard announced, breaking the tension. All those in favor? One by one, hands went up. Some enthusiastically, others reluctantly, but the result was unanimous. Victoria Sterling was out. As security began to escort her from the building, she stopped in front of me one last time. You think you've won, she hissed. But you're just like me now. You've used money and power to destroy people's lives. How does that make you better? I met her gaze steadily. Because I'm going to rebuild what you broke. And I'm going to do it the right way. She laughed, the sound bitter and cold. We'll see how long that idealism lasts. Then she was gone, escorted out of the building she'd ruled for 3 years. Marcus remained in his chair, staring at nothing. And I was left standing in a conference room full of strangers, holding the power I'd never wanted but was determined to use wisely. The hard part, I realized, was just beginning. The first week of my tenure as acting CEO of Sterling Enterprises was a baptism by fire. I moved into Victoria's old office, after having it completely redecorated to remove all traces of her cold aesthetic, and began the brutal work of restructuring a company that had been held together by fear and manipulation. My new board of directors proved invaluable, bringing expertise and ethical frameworks I desperately needed as I navigated corporate waters I'd studied but never sailed before. We started with the employees Victoria had wronged, reaching out to those who'd been unfairly terminated or forced out through hostile conditions. Some were hesitant to trust that things would really change, and I couldn't blame them. But slowly, as we rehired talented people and restructured departments to prioritize both productivity and humane treatment, the company culture began to shift. It wasn't easy and it wasn't quick, but it was necessary. Marcus became a ghost in the building. Technically, he still worked for the company. I hadn't terminated his employment, though many people questioned that decision. Why keep him? Richard Chun asked during one of our daily strategy sessions. His promotion was clearly based on his relationship with Victoria, not merit. And the documents show he actively participated in her worst behaviors. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the city skyline. It was the same view Victoria had enjoyed, but I'd added plants to the windowsill, softening the harsh corporate lines. Because firing him would be about revenge, I said finally. And revenge isn't why I'm here. But he's being transferred to our Portland office, demoted to a junior analyst position at a salary commensurate with his actual qualifications. He'll have to earn his way back if he can. Richard studied me for a long moment. You're more generous than most people would be. Than he deserves. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or maybe, I just don't want to become Victoria Sterling in different clothes. The media had a field day with the story, of course. Abandoned wife reveals she owns company where husband's mistress was CEO was the kindest headline. Others were more salacious, painting me as everything from a vengeful ex-wife to a corporate raider to a feminist icon. I declined most interview requests, issuing only a brief statement through our PR department about the leadership transition and our commitment to ethical business practices. But I couldn't avoid the personal fallout entirely. Friends from my nonprofit days reached out, some supportive, others clearly uncomfortable with my newfound wealth and power. My mother-in-law Patricia called weekly, apologizing repeatedly for Marcus's behavior and expressing pride in what I was accomplishing. And Marcus himself, after being demoted and transferred, sent me an email that I stared at for a full day before finally opening. Emma, it began, and I could almost hear his voice in the words. I know I have no right to contact you, no right to expect you to read this, let alone respond. But I need you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Not your money. God, I didn't even know about the money, which makes my leaving you for Victoria's connections even more pathetic. But I threw away your integrity, your kindness, your steadfast loyalty. I threw away the best person I've ever known because I was blinded by ambition and ego. The email continued for several paragraphs, detailing his regrets, his realization of how Victoria had manipulated him, his recognition of the terrible things he'd done. It ended with, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for another chance. I know that door is closed forever. I just wanted you to know that you won not because you had money and power, but because you were always the better person. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see it." I read the email 3 times, then deleted it. Marcus's remorse, however genuine, wasn't my responsibility to absolve. He'd made his choices, and he would have to live with the consequences. I had a company to rebuild, employees to support, and a legacy to honor. 6 months after assuming control, Sterling Enterprises had transformed dramatically. Employee satisfaction scores had risen by 60%. We'd implemented comprehensive benefits packages, transparent promotion processes, and robust whistleblower protections. Productivity had actually increased despite, or perhaps because of, our more humane policies, proving what I'd always believed. You didn't have to be ruthless to be successful. The company was thriving in ways Victoria's quarterly report-obsessed leadership had never achieved. We were building something sustainable, something ethical, something that would last. And I was building a new version of myself too. One who was strong enough to wield power without being corrupted by it. One who could balance justice with mercy. One who understood that true success meant lifting others up rather than climbing over them. My father would have been proud. I was finally learning to be proud of myself. 9 months after the takeover, I received word that Victoria Sterling was suing for wrongful termination and defamation. Her lawyers claimed that her removal had been purely vindictive, that the allegations of misconduct were exaggerated or fabricated, and that I'd abused my position as majority shareholder to settle a personal vendetta. The lawsuit demanded $50 million in damages and a public apology. Richard Chun brought me the legal documents with an expression somewhere between annoyance and amusement. "She's desperate," he explained, spreading the papers across my desk. "Her reputation is ruined. No major company will touch her, and she's burning through her severance package trying to maintain her lifestyle. This lawsuit is a Hail Mary, and it's going to fail spectacularly." I thought about Victoria's parting words at the courthouse. Power changes everyone. I'd spent the last year vigilantly watching for signs that I was becoming what I'd fought against, checking my motivations, seeking counsel from my board of directors and mentors when I felt uncertain. It was exhausting, this constant self-examination, but necessary. I'd seen too clearly how easy it was to justify small ethical lapses that snowballed into something monstrous. A year ago, this company was broken, I told the room. Not financially. The balance sheets looked great, but morally and culturally. People came to work afraid, uncertain, knowing that their value was measured only by their utility to those in power. That's not the kind of company I want to run, and it's not the kind of company my father built his legacy on. So we've spent this year rebuilding, listening, learning, and changing. I paused, looking around at the faces watching me, some familiar now, others still new, all of them representing the human foundation of everything we were trying to accomplish. But transformation isn't a destination, it's a process. Which is why I'm announcing today the creation of an employee advisory board with real power to review and challenge executive decisions. You'll elect representatives from each department, and they'll have direct access to the CEO and board of directors. Because good leadership means being accountable, being willing to be questioned, and being humble enough to admit when we're wrong. The announcement generated buzz and excitement. After the formal presentation ended, people approached me with questions, concerns, and ideas. I made a point to listen to each one, taking notes, asking follow-up questions, treating every conversation as valuable. One older man from the manufacturing division, someone who'd survived Victoria's regime by keeping his head down, gripped my hand firmly. "Ms. Thornton, I've worked in this industry for 30 years. I've never seen an owner talk to people like me before. Thank you for seeing us as human beings. His words stayed with me long after the summit ended. Later that evening, I sat in my office as sunset painted the city in shades of gold and amber. My assistant brought in the mail, including a handwritten letter with no return address. I recognized Marcus's handwriting immediately. Inside was a single page, brief and to the point. Emma, I'm writing to tell you that I'm leaving Sterling Enterprises and moving across the country. Not running away, just starting over somewhere new, somewhere I can rebuild my career and my character away from the shadow of my mistakes. I'll never stop regretting what I did to you, to us, and to myself. But I'm learning that regret without change is useless. Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right in court. Thank you for not destroying me when you had every right to. And thank you for showing me, through your example, what integrity actually looks like. I hope someday to be half the person you've always been. Take care of yourself, and take care of what you've built. It's extraordinary, and so are you. Marcus. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. It was closure of a sort, though I'd learned that closure was less about what others said, and more about what you chose to carry forward. Marcus would have his own journey now, separate from mine, and I wished him well from a distance. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, my ex-mother-in-law, who'd become an unexpected friend and mentor over the past year. Saw your interview on the Business Channel. Your father would be bursting with pride. Dinner next week. I smiled and replied in the affirmative. Life had become something I never expected but was learning to embrace, full of challenges and responsibilities, yes, but also meaning and purpose. I thought about the woman I'd been when Marcus walked out of our marriage, broken and betrayed, thinking her life was over. I thought about the inheritance I'd never asked for, but had learned to steward responsibly. I thought about Victoria's warning that power corrupts everyone eventually. Maybe she was right. Maybe the constant vigilance would exhaust me. Maybe I'd eventually make compromises that would shame my younger self. But I could also choose to keep trying, keep questioning, keep surrounding myself with people who would hold me accountable. I could choose to measure success not just in quarterly reports, but in lives improved and dignity preserved. As I packed up for the evening, I caught my reflection in the office window, no longer the invisible, overlooked wife, no longer the naive woman who thought love and loyalty were enough. I'd been forged in fire, tempered by betrayal, and shaped by responsibility into something stronger and more complex. I was Emma Thornton, daughter of James Thornton, inheritor of his legacy and his values. I was the woman who'd been abandoned for not being enough, who discovered she was more than anyone imagined. I was the CEO who was determined to prove that power and principles could coexist, that success didn't require selling your soul. The future stretched before me, uncertain and challenging, full of battles yet to fight and decisions yet to make. But I was ready for it now. Marcus had left me thinking I was nothing, and in the end, his betrayal had revealed that I was everything I needed to be. The company was mine. The power was mine. But more importantly, the integrity was mine, and I would guard it fiercely against all threats, including the threat of becoming the very thing I'd fought against. I turned off the office lights and headed for the elevator, leaving Sterling Enterprises behind for the evening but carrying its future with me always. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to either rise to my best self or fall into the comfortable corruptions of power. And every day after that would present the same choice. I'd spent a year learning to be a CEO. Now I would spend a lifetime learning to be a good one. That was the inheritance that truly mattered, not the money or the corporate empire, but the responsibility to use both wisely and well. Marcus had abandoned me thinking I was nothing, unaware the company was my inheritance. He'd been wrong on both counts, and I'd spent a year proving it. But the greatest victory wasn't in his realization of what he'd lost, or in Victoria's downfall, or even in the company's transformation. The greatest victory was in discovering who I was capable of becoming when tested by fire. And I was just getting started.